What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today I wanted to break down some ideas about composition in street photography, specifically discussing content versus form. So with street photography, life is out of our control. There's so many spontaneous elements out there in the world that we want to combine to make a picture. I see somebody jumping over a puddle like Bresson, or a boy and a mother and the beautiful, endearing gesture. You'll notice things on the street like the man smoking the cigarette and, all these sort of classic, tried and true, decisive moments, right, that you're trying to make pictures of out there on the streets. But to me, what makes or breaks a great street photograph is whether or not the content, the moment, is synthesized efficiently with the formality of composition. And we could argue, is form more important than content? Is content more important than form? And ultimately, in the realm of street photography, typically the content and the thing itself and the thing that's going on, or the moment, is much more of our concern. And I think that makes most sense. I think we shouldn't get too caught up in the formality of composition and too caught up with geometry and shape and form. But I believe to become the best street photographer that you can be, you want to be able to synthesize these two things. You want to be able to combine both the formality of a composition with the content and the moment that is occurring on the streets. And so with street photography, it really does come down to putting order to chaos. And this is something very difficult to achieve. But I have some examples here on my wall that could maybe help you understand and visualize what this means. On the left-hand side, we have a scene here of basketball in Baltimore. Very chaotic, very decisive moment. Lots of things going on, lots of gestures. The light is falling just right on a few different people's faces. There's shadow play, there's a moment here, there's energy, there's content. But not only with this photograph do we have content, we have form. We set a stage. We related the subjects that are in the frame to the background. I'm paying attention to the positioning of my physical body in relationship to the subjects. I'm looking at the moment and observing the gestures, but I'm also relating the foreground and the content to the backdrop. I'm relating the moment of the boy playing in the fountain to the decisive, I'm timing that decisive moment of the boy playing in the fountain, but I'm also hyper aware of the background. I'm also hyper aware of how I must position my physical body to create something cohesive, to create something that's visually engaging because of the formality of the composition. I think what falls flat on a lot of street photos is the formality, and the idea of form and shape and putting together the foreground to the background is something that a lot of people struggle with, and I believe it's something to maybe be more aware of. And so, when I'm photographing in certain situations like this in Rome, and I observe a gesture of the hand, I'm trying to not only photograph that decisive moment of the hand, but I'm also trying to relate it to the background. I'm also trying to position the hand on the right-hand side formally so that the left-hand side is filled with those two nuns. And so when I'm taking pictures on the street and I'm observing these decisive moments, I'm not just snapshotting them quickly and moving on. I'm observant of these moments that are occurring. I'm observant of the thing that's going on in front of me, but I'm not only observant and reacting with speed and my intuition to the decisive moment, I'm relating that thing that's going on, the content, to the backdrop, to the amusement ride there on the left-hand side. I'm very much aware of the formalities of what makes a strong photograph, and because of that, I'm able to come home with these images that are very visually engaging and emotionally impactful. And I find that when you're photographing on the streets, it's best to be aware of these different things. It's best to be aware of how you can position yourself in relationship to the background. And so for me, when I'm approaching a scene, I'm photographing, and I'm making these candid pictures, I don't just take a picture and move on, right? I sense the possibility of a photograph. For me at this scene here in Philadelphia, where I photographed this man coming out of the bus stop, and we have this silhouette, and there's this light on the pole, and there's a couple different things in the background formally that I was very aware of. I was aware of that pole jutting out from the left-hand side. I was aware of the light and the way that it cast it here. And the thing was, I sensed the possibility of a photograph, and I knew where I must position myself to find this moment. And so by being patient and being observant and being aware of the different elements in the frame, plugging the background piece of that pole in to my composition initially, plugging the light into the foreground, and then waiting with patience for the spontaneous element of the people that are entering the light, and the silhouette becomes this delight. It becomes this thing that filled the foreground spontaneously. But being aware of the formality of this composition, not only was I able to create something that's strong visually, but there's also something more engaging about the moment itself and the way that the man's face is tense and he's looking in this interesting direction where there's a relationship between the man in the silhouette with the hat, and there's a mystery there, and there's something in the photograph that is not only compositionally sound, but there's also something more engaging of the simple moment of somebody coming through this patch of light with a tense face. And so you can find very simple moments like that. You can find something so mundane and so basic and easy to find, right? You go on any street corner, you observe any bus stop, just watch the light. Set your stage and be observant of the way that you can relate these things to your backgrounds. And so when I'm photographing, a lot of the time, when I'm seeing people on the sidewalk and they're moving towards me, I'm making sure that where I position myself can relate that content, can relate that subject, can relate that moment to my background. I'm making sure that I position myself on the right-hand side of the sidewalk as the people are walking on the left of me so that I can juxtapose and position them against the bank that's on the background with a beautiful architecture on Broad Street. You know, I'm making sure that when I'm photographing, I'm hyper aware of how to relate the content, the movement, and the dynamics to the background in order to create something visually compelling, that creates something dynamic by not only having a strong moment, not only having great content, but also having strong form and relating these things. And this is something I can do time and time again. This is something that I can do with repetition because of practice and because of recognizing the different elements that create strong imagery. Not only are we responsible for responding through our intuition, not only are we responsible for making a photograph of a very quick and fleeting decisive moment, but we must be hyper aware and we must be very observant. We must sense the possibility of a photograph. When I was here at this moment when I made the picture, I was waiting and I was patient and I was walking around this bustling market in Mexico City. But because I noticed that there was too much chaos and there was too many things going on around me, I focused in on this beautiful, colorful backdrop. I focused in on the mural and the interplay between light and shadow, and by waiting for that decisive moment, put order to that chaotic scene and put order to that simple moment of the man walking in and out of the patch of light. But I was hyper aware of the scene. I was very aware of how to position myself in order to achieve this very formal looking photograph. And so not only are we looking for these decisive moments, not only are we responding to our gut, not only are we looking for strong content, we must be hyper aware and consider the visual elements that make strong form, paying attention to our backgrounds, paying attention to the shape and the form, paying attention to the light at a scene, and then synthesizing these different things and creating something visually impactful. And so these are just some random ideas I have on content and form. Hopefully we can dive deeper into these ideas. I quickly turned my iPhone on to discuss this, but we can go ahead and just dissect more photos on my iPad eventually about this topic. I just have to go because here comes the bus. Here comes the bus. Do. Gotta go. Gotta blast.